Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and we are going to be discussing today a new technology that is going to be a game changer. At least that's the saying that a lot of people are using. It's going to be 5G, and we're going to be discussing with an expert in this area what is 5G and why it matters to all of us. And joining us is Jim Carlini. Jim is a consultant, and he wrote a book called Location Connectivity. He's been an expert in this field for many years. And Jim, we appreciate you joining us. Why should any of us be paying attention to 5G, and how might it change how we go about living in our society?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Terry. Let's talk about 5G for a bit. 5G stands for fifth generation cellular networks. And our cellular networks have progressed to a point where this is a huge paradigm shift. It's almost going from, someone said, going from the typewriter to the computer. That's how much more intricate this next generation of networks is. And we have to take a look at that because it will impact the local and regional economy of the United States, as well as the national economy, and to those countries that also adopt 5G across the world.
Have there been any other countries thus far that have adopted this, or is the United States, who's in the lead right now on the adoption of this technology?
I would say from an implementation standpoint, the United States has got a step up over most countries, but other countries are looking at it, and of course, all the large manufacturers like LG, Samsung, all the smartphone manufacturers are building 5G type smartphones across the world. So it will be an international standard, but I would say as far as implementing and rolling out the infrastructure, we're a little bit ahead of most other countries.
And for the layman, what I have heard is that the reason this is going to be so significant is that our current cell phones, the 4G, at least that's what typically most of us are using, have greatly expanded what we used to have. We used to just get text and emails, and now, of course, we can look and watch video. But the 5G connectivity is going to jump so much more that people say it's going to be anywhere, I've heard different numbers, anywhere from about 25 to 100 times greater broadband, and that just as we couldn't look at video before, now we're going to have all kinds of other applications, and that's why this is going to be such a game changer. What are some of the applications that we might expect to have once the 5G technology is rolled out?
Well, definitely video streaming, the large applications from the big content companies like Disney, HBO, Netflix. A lot of companies are looking at new applications that are video based. And before, that was an issue. How do we get all this video streaming out to individuals who have a smartphone? And in the past, I used to talk about getting 1 gigabit of speed out to a person's smartphone. Some people said that that was crazy, that that was too fast. And yet today, we're at that point, and they're even thinking about more than 1 gigabit speeds to the individual so that they can deliver these new applications. So the network itself has to be rebuilt in a way so that it can handle all this extra capacity.
And the thing is, besides we have already, of course, the video streaming, but we, as we know with Netflix, and we see how that changed as an example. Let's look at Netflix for a moment. Before that started, people would go and buy a DVD and they'd mail a DVD to them because we didn't have that video streaming infrastructure. Now Netflix is one of the most successful broadcasters in the world, and has been able to scale their business dramatically because of the tech connectivity that we now have. But with 5G, I think, isn't this also going to have a significant impact on communities, on the kind of businesses that they attract, on the business infrastructure? And I'm thinking just in terms of your expertise and the book that you had, where I know in previous conversations and interviews we've done over the years, connectivity is really the linchpin to the future of growing your local economy, is it not?
Yes, as I said, economic development equals broadband connectivity, and broadband connectivity equals jobs. That's something that I've said in the past, and it really relates to this whole shift where the cellular network, part of the infrastructure, is being upgraded. And that's going to really create a lot of new applications besides the streaming video. We're going to be able to control equipment. We're going to be able to control fleets of vehicles, not just the autonomous car, but someone that has a fleet of trucks and they want to know exactly where all those trucks are at and where their cargo is at. You're going to get a lot more information traveling through this new 5G network because there's so many new applications coming across that we didn't even think about before. We didn't have the capability, but now with this added strength of 5G, and there's going to be a lot more antenna that are being put out throughout the areas, you're going to see a lot of new applications that are going to create new jobs and just new types of businesses.
And that's something we should talk about. Right now, the 4G technology, the antenna has a range. I don't know exactly. I'm going to say, make up a number. You could correct me, but maybe a mile. The 5G range of the antennas is going to be much more limited, but more intense. And so we're going to have many more of these antennas to have the 5G technology. And there has been some people, whether they are accurate or not, but they allege that there could be a health problem with having so much intensity of the broadband going through the air, as if we are all going to be living inside turning the outside into a microwave oven where we're all getting fried a little bit. Do you have any background on this, or is there any good evidence whether or not these allegations are accurate?
Well, there are some studies that have been out there that are just starting to sort of scratch the surface, and there is going to be some impact because we're in brand new territory. So no one can conclude that it's not going to be a health risk or a health issue. Some people say that we're in the middle of an experiment when we put this 5G network together on the ground. And in relationship to what you talked about as far as where the antennas are, we're talking about the placement of antennas in a lot shorter distance, where it's anywhere from maybe 6 houses to 8 houses. That's how much the antennas, that's how many antennas you need in order to saturate an area so that you have 5G connectivity. So there is a lot more microwave, and that's something that needs to be studied. And I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't say that one person is right and the other person's wrong. But it's something that we have to keep looking at and making sure that there isn't any cancer factors or anything like that involved in the rollout of the network. That would make a big difference. If that's the case, then they'd have to do a lot more things to the network in order to shield everyone from this new radiation threat. And that's something that people are looking at.
Yeah, I don't want to make it overblown because neither of us really know. The fact of the matter is, one thing that's kind of interesting is that nobody knows, and yet we're rolling this out, some would argue prematurely. But the other thing is then I can just see where it's going to be maybe stymied in the rollout because you're going to get into, I would guess, zoning laws at the local level, county level, unless a state were to try to give a blanket, pass a bill that would allow the AT&Ts of the world to roll this out in a blanket form. But otherwise, it's going to be maybe it's just something, I suppose, to make this short, that we as a society should know that while there's a lot of great things that might come from much greater connectivity, that there is this other aspect to it that we should at least be made aware of.
Right. And the whole issue of if there are some microwave emissions coming out, there is the other solution, and that is to shield some of that microwave emission. And there are different solutions for that. So it's not something that we can't fix or can't remedy. It's just something that we have to find out what exactly we need to do if it's at a point where the microwave is more intense than the human body can stand. And that's something that, again, we don't have enough information on that. And as they're rolling this out, they're going to probably find out. And your other question or your other point, as far as zoning boards, hopefully we don't have to deal with local zoning boards, because that's something that they get so far into the minutia that they could stymie a rollout for years. And in working in some projects, I've seen where some areas will do something on a regional basis, so that if you're rolling out, let's say, a large intelligent business campus, or like they rolled out in Illinois, they had an 800-acre campus. They had, prior to rolling it out, they talked to all the municipalities involved to say that they wanted a sort of a fast tracking of this project, so that they didn't get involved in problems with zoning and the minutia of, you put in a 3-inch curb or a 3.5-inch curb. And so there's people that are already looking at that, as far as, do we regionalize the zoning issues so that we don't run into that problem? Because that is a real problem.
And Jim, the other thing is, let me say to the audience, this is an issue we wanted you to be made aware of. And a lot of times we cover things as a bill moves through the legislature. There is going to be, I believe in all likelihood, a rewrite of the Illinois telecommunications bill. I think that's going to be happening next year. So 5G is already being rolled out in certain areas. I think I forget just all the different areas, the carriers that are working on this at present. But it is something that is happening, and I would say a couple of things. One, you need to be aware of this for a variety of reasons. It could mean that it's going to have a major impact on any number of businesses. One of them could be, as an example, that there is a shortage of surgeons around the world. We have them in the first world countries, but not so much in the third world countries. But if you had the proper technology, the proper connectivity, we could literally have a surgeon in Chicago operating on a soldier out in the field in Germany. And that's how just part of this is going to change our impact. When we talk about the Internet of Things as compared to the Internet, Jim, what does that mean? And is this, let's just give, because we hear some of these buzzwords and we wonder, what the heck does that mean, the Internet of Things? What does the Internet of Things mean, and how does that maybe connect the dots to our topic on 5G?
When we talk about the Internet of Things, we're trying to add a lot more devices. We're trying to add a lot more capabilities to interconnect devices, such as, people talk about, connecting your refrigerator, your toaster, your dishwasher, your washing machine, and putting in sensors to all those different appliances, so that you can control and monitor them much more easily. And with that, you have a much more complex network. Now, 5G, with all its capabilities and its speed, 5G is much faster than 4G, we'll be able to add on all those devices so that we can more or less build a fabric of different appliances and devices within the infrastructure that we can control and monitor. And it's something that when you go to the store, if you go to Best Buy or the appliance stores, you're seeing more and more devices like appliances like refrigerators, washing machines coming out with little sensors and little types of network sensors that you can somehow interconnect, and you'll be able to manage and control them remotely. Now, that's something that some people are doing on a sort of an initial basis today. You'll see more of that. But I think that sometimes people overhype the Internet of Things as far as it's going to be everything to everyone. And like anything else, when you roll out technology, it's only as good as if the people actually apply it. You know, you can have the creation of technology, but then lagging behind that is the acceptance of the technology. And that's what we're at right now. Just because someone is creating a lot of these things, if it's not accepted by the market, people just walk away from it and say, well, it really doesn't matter to my household, or it doesn't matter to my lifestyle. A great example was like quadraphonic stereo. That was a innovation some years ago about stereo systems, and everybody said, oh, everyone's going to go to a quadraphonic system. Well, that never happened. And we'll see the same type of things as we look at the Internet of Things. Some of the ideas and applications people are talking about and hyping, you probably will never see rolled out, because if the market doesn't accept it, the market moves on. So one of the big things we'll see definitely is that the infrastructure is going to improve dramatically, and that whole 5G capability is going to be interwoven into the infrastructure, or what I call the platform for commerce.
The one thing that comes to me as you were talking about this is, a lot of times people think, is this really going to be a big thing? We see changes, and I'm going to give you an example, give our viewers an example. We all grew up just with a doorbell, and the purpose of the doorbell was to make the ring so you knew someone was at the front door. But now, because of the connectivity we have with 4G, we've had industries develop around the fact that the common doorbell can now have a video camera in it, and you can have your cell phone, and you can see who's at the door. And we see these commercials. Who's at the front door? You can look at it while you're on vacation in Florida. You can see who's knocking on your front door in Illinois. That's one example, and it may not seem like a game changer, but when you think of that, I believe that business that someone started just because now you could do that, I believe that business just sold for over $1 billion. And so we are going to see any number of applications. One of the people on a panel recently I looked at about 5G, I think said something pretty accurate. He said, if anybody can tell you definitively how this is going to change society, you should run away from them, because the reality is no one knows how this is going to change. There's going to be any number of ramifications, but what we do know is that it's going to have a significant change in the main. And maybe that's the thing that we should make sure that I think in this small addition that we should bring to the viewers' attention. It's something for them to have on their radar that this is going to be changing, and for any number of organizations, colleges, and just different businesses around the country, they ought to have it on their radar and start thinking in terms of what will it mean to us if we are going to have connectivity that could be 5 times or 25 or 100 times as fast. And we might just say as a society, what does it cost us when we talk about right now in the legislature having a $32 or $35 billion capital bill so that, among other things, we can rebuild our highways? Well, what would it do to the highways if we could have tens of thousands of workers working from home and not going to work via the highway, and just allow the trucks on the highway, because we can be connected to our office in real-time communications by having the internet be 100 times faster than it is currently. You want to comment on that, Jim? And I think we'll wrap it up.
Sure, I'll give you a real good example of this. Intelligent highways, and where you embed sensors within the highway itself, so that you can have autonomous or driverless trucks going from one point to the other. They're actually going to do this in Wisconsin. Part of the Foxconn deal with Wisconsin is that they want to be able to drive trucks between the Foxconn headquarters and Mitchell Field, which is the airport in Milwaukee. And so they're actually building sensors, they're putting in sensors into the interstate so that the trucks have a path to follow, all based on autonomous driving, driverless trucks from point A to point B, from the airport to the headquarters. And what I talk about that is that that's something that you do it for one company, but as soon as it's in place, now other companies that are along that highway, like Amazon and Uline, is the headquarters of Uline is there. All of a sudden, those companies can take advantage of that same type of sensor that's embedded in the infrastructure. And that's a huge game changer. And that's a very practical game changer. We're not talking about toasters that communicate or refrigerators that communicate. We're actually talking about having the ability of having fleets of vehicles go back and forth without any drivers, and they're connected by all these embedded sensors that are also being part of the 5G network, because everything's being communicated in real time. And that's something that I think is a really good example of what things can be done. And that's something that everybody else has got to start to catch up on, because think about this. If you don't have that in your infrastructure, you're at a disadvantage. The platform for commerce that your region has will either attract new businesses like Foxconn, or they'll just jump away and say, hey, let's look at the next town, let's look at the next state. So this is something people have to be aware of, because this is going to be not only a game changer for the way people run their lifestyles, it's going to be a game changer for job creation. And jobs in the future are going to be tied into this new fabric that we call 5G connectivity.
I will point out a couple of things briefly. I mean, we saw when we had Route 66, and we have a lot of tourists in Illinois going down the old Route 66, because for the very reason that once we put in Highway 55, people went on Highway 55, and so many of these small towns that were cut off the highway, their growth stopped. The Route 66 tourists are slowed down. They weren't tourists then, they were using Route 66. So that's one example. If you're not going to be on the 5G infrastructure, we might say that this is like trying to operate a city in the 1930s or a small community if you're not on the electric grid. The electric grid was the new connectivity of the 20th century, and in many ways 5G, and who knows what follows in a 6G, is going to be the new connectivity for commerce going forward. And that's something that we should have our lawmakers know, our mayors know, and certainly our business executives know. And that's why this could be such a game changer. And I will also point out two things to the audience. One, we're going to have Jim back on a periodic basis as this moves forward, because it's too big of a story for us to cover in one example. And the other thing is, as you look at what we are doing, Jim and I have done interviews in the past, but he doesn't live in the Springfield area. So it was only on those rare occasions when I would be heading to his neck of the woods that we could get together, or when we were at a conference together in Chicago, that we could do an interview. And what we are seeing right now with the Illinois channel is Jim's in East Dundee and I'm here in Springfield, and we're doing this interview. And it goes to show the kind of new technologies and applications that can happen when we increase the connectivity via the internet. And this is not something that I thought that we were going to be doing just a few years back, but here we are doing it now.
I think that's absolutely right. And just to introduce maybe two things we can touch on next time is the decision to not go with the latest layer of infrastructure. We can go back all the way to right after the Civil War when St. Louis was a larger city than Chicago, but the politicians in St. Louis didn't accept moving forward with that new layer of infrastructure, which was the railroads, and they decided to restrict the railroads and go back to just running everything, all the trade through the riverboats. That impacted St. Louis because the railroads then went to Chicago to put their regional hub in, and the rest, as they say, is history. Chicago became a bigger city than St. Louis, and that's something we should talk about because a political decision today of not moving forward with new infrastructure and new layers of infrastructure can impact a city and region for the next 50 to 100 years, if not more.
Jim, we appreciate you taking the time to talk about it. We've already gone longer than I intended, but this is a fascinating topic and there's so much to discuss, which is why we'll look to do this again in the future. We appreciate you joining us on the Illinois channel, and thank you again. And I, again, would say to our viewers, thank you for watching, and please stay in touch on this issue. We'll do our best to bring you this kind of information that I think you're not getting enough of necessarily, but that's what we see as our role. We just did close to a half an hour here for you. We could have done a whole day seminar on this, and Jim is a kind of keynote speaker that typically is only heard at big conferences around the country, and so we're bringing him to you via the Illinois channel and his expertise, and we're going to do it again. Jim Carlini, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Terry, and look forward to talking with you again.
All right.